The woman in seat 13F had been dead for 2 years. At least, that's what her tombstone said. But when Flight 920 started falling from the sky at 41,000 feet, the dead pilot opened her eyes, and 342 passengers had no idea the ghost sitting among them was their only chance at survival. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Elena Volkov looked exactly like everyone else on Flight 920. She wore comfortable jeans that had seen better days, faded at the knees from 2 years of quiet life in Oslo. A soft gray sweater that she'd bought 3 years ago in a small Norwegian shop, back when she was still learning to be someone new. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, no fancy styling, no makeup to speak of. She carried a worn backpack and a paperback thriller she'd picked up at the Denver airport bookstore for $12.99. Seat 13F. Middle seat. Economy class. Universally acknowledged as the worst seat on any long-haul flight. The businessman in 13E, expensive charcoal suit, silver cufflinks that probably cost more than Elena's entire outfit, Italian leather briefcase, never once looked at her. His fingers flew across his laptop keyboard, probably closing some 7-figure deal. Every few minutes he'd sip from his scotch and soda, eyes never leaving the screen, completely absorbed in his world of spreadsheets and profit margins. The teenage girl in 13D had her earbuds in from the moment she sat down. She scrolled through TikTok videos endlessly, occasionally giggling at something on her screen. Her bright pink nails, freshly done, probably for this trip, tapped against a phone case covered in K-pop stickers. She was traveling alone, Elena had noticed during boarding. Probably a college student heading to study abroad in Europe. To both of them, Elena simply didn't exist. She was invisible. Background noise. Just another face in a sea of 342 passengers and crew on United Airlines Flight 920, a Boeing 787-10 Dreamliner making the long journey from Denver to Frankfurt, Germany. That's exactly how Elena wanted it. When the flight attendant came by with the beverage cart about 90 minutes into the flight, Elena smiled politely, a practiced, forgettable smile she'd perfected over 2 years, and asked for coffee. Black, no sugar, no cream. Simple. Unmemorable. The flight attendant poured it without really seeing her, already thinking about the next row, the next request, the 100 other passengers who needed something. Just part of the endless routine of a transatlantic flight. Elena took the cup with a quiet, "Thank you," and went back to her book. To anyone watching, and no one was, she could have been anything. A middle school teacher traveling to visit family in Germany. An accountant attending a conference in Frankfurt. A consultant flying to meet a client. Maybe someone's mom taking a solo vacation after the kids left for college. Nobody could possibly guess the truth. Nobody could know that the woman in the gray sweater, reading a cheap thriller in seat 13F, sipping bad airline coffee, had once been one of the most legendary pilots in the United States Air Force. 2 years ago, it felt like a lifetime now, Elena Volkov had been famous in military aviation circles. Not celebrity famous. She'd never wanted that kind of attention, never sought the spotlight. But among pilots, among the men and women who pushed aircraft to their absolute limits, who lived and breathed the physics of flight, her name carried serious weight. Her call sign was Valkyrie. In Norse mythology, the Valkyries were warrior angels who flew over battlefields and decided which soldiers would live and which would die. They chose the honored dead to bring to Valhalla. The name fit Elena perfectly, though not in the way most people thought. She didn't decide who lived or died in battle. She decided that everyone would live. No matter what. Elena specialized in the impossible. High-altitude emergency recovery. When other pilots looked at a situation and said, unrecoverable, when the physics seemed to guarantee death, when the textbook said there was no way out, Elena found a way. She'd saved 3 pilots from crashes that should have been absolutely fatal. Aircraft spinning out of control at 50,000 feet where the air is so thin that normal flying rules simply don't apply anymore. Planes with catastrophic system failures, wings damaged, engines dead, hydraulics gone. Situations where the standard procedure was, eject, pull your parachute, and hope you survive the fall. Elena didn't believe in ejecting. She believed in bringing everyone home. Over the course of her career, she developed what became known as the Volkov Protocol, a comprehensive series of counterintuitive maneuvers specifically designed for recovering aircraft above 45,000 feet. Techniques that felt completely wrong to pilots trained in conventional methods but followed the deeper, more complex laws of physics. Methods that required perfect timing, absolute trust in the mathematics, nerves of pure steel, and a willingness to do things that every instinct screamed were insane. Military flight academies around the world studied her techniques. New pilots memorized her procedures alongside basic flight principles. Flight instructors at Nellis Air Force Base showed videos of her rescues and said, "This is what's possible if you truly understand your aircraft, if you trust the physics more than your fear." Valkyrie became a legend. A myth. The pilot who could save anyone from anything. But legends come with a cost that nobody talks about. The nightmares started after her second rescue. Dreams of spinning through thin air, unable to breathe, controls not responding, ground rushing up at terminal velocity. She'd wake up gasping, her sheets soaked with sweat, her heart hammering so hard it hurt, taking several long minutes to remember she was safe, she was on the ground, she was alive. The third rescue made it worse. That pilot, Captain James "Hawk" Morrison, had been her friend. Someone she'd trained with, laughed with, trusted with her life on multiple missions. His F-15 had suffered dual-engine failure at 52,000 feet during a training exercise. She'd saved him, guided him through a recovery that aerospace engineers later said shouldn't have been possible. But just barely. The margin between success and disaster had been less than 2 seconds. 2 seconds where one wrong input, one moment of hesitation, would have killed them both. After that rescue, Elena couldn't sleep more than 3 hours at a time. Coffee became her constant companion, she went through 6, 7, sometimes 8 cups a day just to function. Her hands developed a slight tremor that only appeared when she wasn't flying, when adrenaline wasn't coursing through her system. Her commanding officers noticed but said nothing, because when Valkyrie was in the air, she was still absolutely perfect. Flawless. Legendary. But on the ground, she was falling apart. Then came the Arctic mission. It was classified, so heavily classified that Elena still didn't know all the details of what they'd been trying to accomplish even now, 2 years later. Some kind of experimental reconnaissance aircraft. Flying at altitudes where even military planes rarely ventured, pushing the envelope of what was possible. Testing new systems, new capabilities, new limits of human flight. Elena had been chosen because she was the best. Because if something went wrong at 62,000 feet, at the very edge of space, she was the only pilot who might survive it. Something went very, very wrong. She still remembered it in fragments, like a nightmare that wouldn't quite fade even in daylight. The warning alarms suddenly screaming in her helmet. The sudden, catastrophic loss of power. The aircraft beginning to tumble, spinning through air too thin to provide lift, too thin to give her control surfaces any bite. The ground, if you could call the Arctic Ocean's ice ground, getting closer and closer with terrifying speed. She'd ejected. That much was certain. The explosive charges had blown her canopy free, the roar deafening even through her helmet. The rocket in her seat had fired, throwing her clear of the dying aircraft with brutal force. Her parachute had deployed with a snap that wrenched her shoulders. And then, cold. Unimaginable, soul-crushing cold. The shock of hitting Arctic water so frigid that it felt like being stabbed with 1,000 knives simultaneously. Her survival suit kept her alive, but just barely. The water temperature was 31 degrees Fahrenheit. Humans last maybe 15 minutes in water that cold before hypothermia shuts down vital organs. The official report said she died. Aircraft went down in the Arctic Ocean at coordinates classified. No survivors. Pilot's body lost in the frozen waters, presumed dead. Captain Elena Valkyrie Volkov, age 36, decorated veteran, recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross, one of the finest pilots her generation had ever produced. Gone. Another name on the memorial wall. The truth was more complicated than death usually is. A Norwegian fishing vessel had seen her parachute. They'd pulled her from the water after 8 minutes, hypothermic, barely conscious, her lips blue and her core temperature dangerously low. They'd radioed for help, but in the confusion, the remote location, the language barriers, the chaos, the right messages never got to the right people. By the time communication was sorted out, the US military had already declared her dead and closed the case. Elena spent 3 months in a small hospital in Tromsø, northern Norway. The doctors saved her life, but they couldn't fix everything. Her body healed, the frostbite damage to her fingers was minor. Her lungs recovered from breathing salt water. The hypothermia reversed with warming in time. But her mind, that was different. That damage went deeper than medicine could reach. The PTSD hit hard. Worse than before, worse than anything she'd experienced. She'd have full-blown panic attacks at random moments. The sound of jet engines, which she'd loved her entire life, now made her chest tight and her breath short. A Norwegian psychiatrist, a kind woman named Dr. Ingrid Bjornsted, worked with her throughout her recovery. They talked about trauma, about survival, about what it means to live when you were supposed to die. "You were Valkyrie," Dr. Bjornsted said one day. "The one who decided everyone lives. But who decided that you should live? You. Only you. So what do you want your life to be now?" That question changed everything for Elena. She learned that the U.S. Air Force thought she was dead. There had been a memorial service at Nellis Air Force Base, full honors, folded flag, the works. Her name had been added to a wall commemorating fallen pilots. Her parents had grieved and slowly moved on. She could have corrected the mistake. One phone call would have done it. But she didn't make that call. Because Elena Volkov, Valkyrie, was tired. Bone deep, soul-crushing tired. Tired of the nightmares. Tired of living at the edge of death. Tired of being the person everyone called when the impossible needed to happen. She'd given 12 years to the Air Force. She'd saved lives. She'd earned the right to walk away. So she did. She stayed in Norway. She found a small apartment in Oslo. She got a job as a technical writer for an aviation safety company. The work was satisfying in a completely different way than flying had been. She was still helping people, still saving lives potentially, but without the adrenaline, without the constant stress. For 2 years, she lived a quiet life. She drank coffee at the same cafe every morning. She took long walks along the Oslo waterfront. She read books. She went to movies. She had dinner with friends from work who knew her as Elena the technical writer, not Valkyrie the legendary pilot. She built peace from the wreckage of her old life, brick by quiet brick. She never touched aircraft controls. Didn't visit airports except as a passenger. This trip to Frankfurt was her first flight in 2 years. A work obligation, a consulting meeting about safety manual revisions. Nothing exciting. Nothing dangerous. Just a normal business trip. Just another passenger in seat 13F. She'd thought about whether flying would trigger her PTSD. But she'd decided to try it without medication. She was a passenger now, not a pilot. She didn't have to be in control. Be invisible. Be normal. Be anyone except Valkyrie. That plan lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes into the flight. The first sign of trouble was a sound. Not loud, a distant thump that most passengers didn't register. But Elena's trained ear caught it immediately. Her hands tightened on the armrests. Her book slipped from her fingers. That wasn't a normal sound. That was impact. The businessman in 13E looked up from his laptop, frowning. Did you hear? Then came the alarms. Not in the cabin, not yet. But Elena could hear them through the cockpit door. The urgent, piercing shriek of multiple warnings. The sound every pilot dreads. The aircraft shuddered. A deep, wrong vibration that Elena felt in her bones. Flight 920 was cruising at 41,000 feet over the North Atlantic Ocean. Below them, nothing but cold, dark water for hundreds of miles. The worst possible place for something to go wrong. In the cockpit, Captain Robert Hayes and First Officer Maria Chin stared at their instruments in disbelief. A military drone, suffering from catastrophic navigation failure, had struck Flight 920's left wing. The impact point was devastating. A 6-foot section of wing structure tore completely away. Hydraulic lines ruptured. Fuel tanks opened, and jet fuel began streaming from the damaged wing. Alarms screamed. Master warning lights flashed red. The flight control computer tried to compensate, but it was fighting a losing battle. Captain Hayes grabbed the controls, feeling them respond sluggishly. Emergency checklist, he barked. Wing damage, hydraulic failure. Running it now, Chen replied, voice tight with fear. But they both knew the truth. There wasn't a checklist for this. This combination of damage, structural failure, hydraulic loss, fuel leak at high altitude, wasn't in the manual because aircraft that suffered this didn't survive. The plane began descending. Not controlled. An inevitable slide toward the ocean. In the cabin, passengers started noticing. The teenage girl pulled out her earbuds. Why are we tilting? The businessman's laptop slid across his tray table. His face went pale. A woman gasped. Look at the wing. She pointed out the window. Panic rippled through the cabin. Elena didn't need to look. She already knew. Her professional assessment took seconds, structural compromise to left wing, mid-span. Fuel leak from ruptured tanks. Loss of hydraulic pressure. Asymmetric lift causing uncontrolled descent. Recovery options, virtually none using standard procedures. Survival probability, less than 5%. Time until unrecoverable dive, 8 to 10 minutes. Then the oxygen masks dropped. Panels popped open. Yellow masks fell. The recorded message played, oxygen masks have been deployed. That's when true panic started. The teenage girl started crying. I don't want to die. I'm only 17. A man shouted, we're going to crash. Oh God. A mother held her children, whispering reassurances she didn't believe. The businessman tried calling his wife, hands shaking. Lisa, I need to tell her. Throughout the cabin, crying, praying, calling loved ones, preparing to die. The captain's voice came over speakers, trying to sound calm. Ladies and gentlemen, we have experienced a collision with an object. We have significant damage. Please remain calm and follow crew instructions. What he didn't say, every simulation showed this damage was unrecoverable. They were going down. Flight attendants moved through the cabin, helping with masks, projecting calm. But Elena saw fear in their eyes. Elena sat perfectly still in 13F. Hands gripping armrests. Eyes closed. But inside, her mind raced. She was analyzing. Calculating. Running scenarios with precision born from 6,000 hours in the air. She knew this situation. The physics. The core problem. This was a Volkov scenario, where standard procedures would fail, where conventional wisdom would kill everyone. Elena had developed techniques for exactly this emergency. She'd trained for it. She'd saved 3 pilots from similar situations. She knew how to save this plane. But that was Valkyrie. That was 2 years ago. That was someone who died in the Arctic. Elena Volkov, the technical writer, didn't fly anymore. Didn't save people anymore. She'd walked away. She'd earned her peace. This wasn't her problem. The plane dropped another 1,000 feet. Descent accelerating. The teenager sobbed. I don't want to die. I haven't even gone to college. Please, someone help us. The businessman whispered, tears streaming. I'm sorry, Lisa. I'm so sorry. 342 people on this plane. Each with their own life, their own dreams, their own families waiting. In 8 minutes, they would all die. Unless someone who understood the physics, who knew the techniques, who trained for the impossible, chose to act. Elena opened her eyes. Not my fight, she thought. I died 2 years ago. I earned my peace. But she knew it wasn't true. Heroes don't get to retire. Legends don't get to walk away when people are dying. And Valkyrie, the one who decided everyone lives, couldn't sit in 13F while 342 people died when she knew how to save them. Damn it, Elena whispered. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. At Keflavik Air Base in Iceland, the scramble alarm went off at 14:47 local time. 2 pilots, Captain Marcus, Blade, Hendricks and Lieutenant Sarah, Reaper, Chen, were playing cards in the ready room. The alarm shattered the quiet. Civilian aircraft in distress. The operations officer burst in. United Flight 920, Boeing 787, critical structural damage, descending over the North Atlantic. You're launched. Move. They were running before he finished. Flight suits on. Helmets grabbed. Into their F-22 Raptors. For minutes from alarm to wheels up. The F-22 Raptor is the most advanced fighter in the world. But today they weren't hunting enemies. They were trying to save lives. Their radios crackled with updates as they went supersonic. Flight 920 is at 38,000 feet, descending. Last position. The controller gave coordinates, 280 miles from your position. Descent rate 1,200 feet per minute. Blade transmitted, Flight 920, this is NATO Fighter Patrol Blade and Reaper. We're inbound. Can you describe your situation? The captain's voice came back, strained, Blade, we have catastrophic left-wing damage from collision with a drone. We've lost structural integrity, losing fuel, controls compromised. Descending through 36,000 feet. I don't know how to stop it. Translation, we're going to crash. Hang in there, 920. We'll be there in 3 minutes. At NATO operations in Brussels, controllers pulled up all data on Flight 920. A senior controller stared at telemetry. The numbers told a grim story. My God, he muttered. This is a Volkov scenario. A younger officer looked up. A what scenario? Captain Elena Volkov. Call sign Valkyrie. Air Force test pilot. She specialized in high-altitude emergency recovery, situations exactly like this. Developed techniques for asymmetric damage, control failures at altitude. Can we get her on the line? The senior controller shook his head. She's dead. Went down over the Arctic 2 years ago. The techniques are still taught, but without someone who truly understands them, who's performed them. He trailed off grimly. Over the emergency frequency, NATO transmitted, Flight 920, do you have any military pilots aboard with high-altitude emergency experience? Long pause. Then the captain's bitter laugh, we need Elena Volkov. But she's been dead for 2 years. Blade felt a chill. He'd heard of Valkyrie. Every fighter pilot had. They'd studied her techniques at Nellis. Watched videos of her rescues. Practiced her maneuvers. She was a legend. And legend stayed dead. 2 minutes to intercept, Reaper's voice came through. They came in fast, decelerating as they approached Flight 920. What they saw made Blade's breath catch. The 787's left wing looked like something had taken a massive bite from it. A section of leading edge simply gone. Fuel streamed in a long crystallizing trail. The wing's shape was wrong, asymmetric, causing the aircraft to fight itself. The plane descended in a slow spiral. Not fast enough to be a dive, but steady. Inevitable. "Dear God," Reaper whispered. Blade keyed his radio. "We have visual on Flight 920. Wing structural failure, approximately 6 feet missing from left wing leading edge. Massive fuel leak. Aircraft in controlled descent but deteriorating. Altitude 34,000 feet, descent rate 1,200 feet per minute." He paused, doing math. 7 minutes before recovery became impossible. "Command, I don't see how they survive this." At NATO operations, the senior controller stared at his screen, feeling helpless. 2 of the world's most advanced fighters on station, full resources of NATO, and none of it mattered. "Copy, Blade. Continue observation." In Flight 920's cockpit, the captain and first officer were out of ideas. They'd tried everything. Every checklist. Every procedure. Nothing worked. 5 minutes, the first officer said quietly. "Maybe 6. Then we lose it completely." "I know. There's got to be something." "There isn't. This is beyond our training. We need." He stopped. "We need Valkyrie. Someone who understands physics at this level. But she's been dead for 2 years." Then, so quietly everyone almost missed it, a new voice came over the emergency frequency. A woman's voice. Calm. Controlled. Carrying absolute authority. "Blade, Reaper, this is Valkyrie. Authentication code Victor Kilo 77 Romeo. I'm aboard Flight 920. I need visual confirmation on wing damage. Where exactly is the structural compromise?" For 3 full seconds, nobody spoke. Then Blade's voice, barely a whisper, "Did she just say Valkyrie?" The walk from 13F to the cockpit was only 60 feet. To Elena, it felt like crossing between 2 lives. Each step forward, she left behind Elena the technical writer. The quiet woman with the peaceful life. Each step, she became someone else. Someone she'd thought she'd left in the Arctic. Valkyrie. A young flight attendant blocked her path. "Ma'am, return to your seat. I need to speak with the captain. Now." "That's not possible." Elena's voice changed. Suddenly it carried command. Authority. "Listen carefully. My name is Captain Elena Volkov. Call sign Valkyrie. Former Air Force pilot specializing in high-altitude emergency recovery. This aircraft is in a Volkov scenario. You have 6 minutes before this becomes unrecoverable. I can save this aircraft, but I need access to that cockpit immediately." The attendant stared, mouth open. "Tell the captain that Valkyrie is aboard. He'll understand." The attendant ran toward the cockpit. Elena stood in the aisle, surrounded by panicking passengers. She tried to leave this behind. But here she was again. The attendant returned, pale. "The captain says that's impossible. Valkyrie died 2 years ago. Tell him I got better. We're wasting time." The teenage girl had followed Elena. "Are you really going to save us?" Tears streaked her face. Elena looked at her. 17 years old. Whole life ahead. "Yes," Elena said simply. "Go back to your seat and hold on. It's going to get rough, but we're all going home today." 30 seconds later, Elena stood at the cockpit door. It opened. Captain Hayes turned. He saw an ordinary woman in jeans and a sweater. "Who are you?" "Captain Elena Volkov. Call sign Valkyrie. Serial number 3345789. Declared killed in action 2 years ago. I survived. I've been living in Oslo. Today I'm supposed to be flying to a meeting. She paused. Instead, I'm going to save your aircraft. The co-pilot shook his head. This is insane. Captain, Elena interrupted, eyes on instruments. You're descending through 32,000 feet at 1,200 feet per minute. Left wing lost 15% structural integrity. Leaking fuel at 200 gallons per minute. You have 5 minutes before catastrophic failure. At that point, unrecoverable. She turned to face him. Or we do this my way. I've recovered 3 aircraft from similar situations. I developed techniques for exactly this. But I need your complete trust right now. 5 minutes. Decide. The captain looked at her. At instruments. At his co-pilot's terrified face. Over the radio, Flight 920, this is Blade. Please confirm, did someone say Valkyrie? Elena took the co-pilot's headset. Blade, this is Valkyrie. Authentication code Victor Kilo 77 Romeo. Confirm my identity with command, but while you're doing that, I need visual confirmation on wing damage. Where exactly is the structural compromise? Stunned silence. Then. Valkyrie, this is Blade. Ma'am, we studied your techniques at Nellis. We thought you were dead. I was. It didn't take. Now tell me about that wing. Rapid conversation in background at NATO operations. Someone pulling her file, checking voice signature. Blade came back, Valkyrie, you have 6 feet of leading edge structure missing, mid-span left wing. Fuel streaming from 2 breach points. Control surfaces showing flutter. Copy, Blade. Stand by. Elena turned to the captain. Well. He stared 1 more second. Then unbuckled. The observer seat is yours. Tell me what to do. Elena slid between the pilots. Eyes scanning instruments. Mind working through solutions. First, stop fighting the aircraft. You're trying to keep wings level, which bleeds energy and increases stress on damaged structure. That's going to kill us. But if we don't, we use the asymmetry instead of fighting it. Controlled bank into the good wing, using it as primary lift surface. Reduces stress on damaged side while maintaining sufficient airspeed. The co-pilot's voice rose, that's insane. Banking into descent makes us fall faster. No. Banking while maintaining specific power settings and pitch converts descent rate into controllable spiral. It's energy management. Trust the physics. She guided them step by step, voice calm. Captain, gentle roll to the right. 5 degrees. Slow and steady. Rolling right, he said, voice tight. Aircraft tilted. Passengers screamed. But Elena watched instruments with satisfaction. Good. Now reduce power on right engine by 5%. Increase left to 88%. That increases asymmetry. Yes. Creating intentional asymmetry to counter unintentional asymmetry. The math works. Trust me. He made adjustments. The aircraft shuddered, then, something changed. Descent rate decreased. We went from 1,200 to 1,000 feet per minute, the co-pilot said, disbelieving. It's working, Elena confirmed. Now adjust trim. Small rudder inputs. Let the aircraft find its balance point. Over radio, Reaper, Blade, are you seeing this? The 787 just changed its descent profile. Like someone who knows what they're doing is flying it, Blade finished. Valkyrie, what's your plan? Controlled asymmetric descent to 12,000 feet, then emergency approach to Shannon Airport. It's going to be ugly, but we're going to make it. For the next 12 minutes, Elena guided them through flying that defied every commercial aviation principle but followed pure physics. Maintain 15-degree bank to the right, she instructed calmly. Don't fight it. Let the good wing do the work. Captain Hayes' hands were cramped on the controls, but he followed her instructions exactly. The aircraft felt wrong, constantly tilted, engines at asymmetric thrust, controls responding sluggishly, but the numbers didn't lie. They were descending slower. More controlled. Blade, I need you to fly formation on our damaged side, Elena transmitted. Call out any changes you see in the wing structure. If that damage propagates, I need to know immediately. Copy, Valkyrie. Moving into position. The F-22 slid closer, Blade's trained eyes scanning the damaged wing. Valkyrie, I'm seeing increased flutter on your outboard aileron. And the fuel leak is getting worse. Expected. The lower altitude means denser air, more stress. But we're managing it. Elena turned to the first officer. Chen, I need you to shut down the left engine fuel supply from the damaged wing tanks. Switch to center tank only. We need to stop that leak. Chen's fingers flew across controls. Fuel transfer in progress. Left wing tanks isolating, now. The fuel stream from the damaged wing slowed, then stopped entirely. Good work, Elena said. That buys us time. Captain, begin reducing descent rate. Very gently. We're going to level off at 12,000 feet. It took another 8 agonizing minutes, but they did it. The crippled 787 finally leveled off at 12,000 feet, holding altitude in a constant 15-degree bank, asymmetric thrust keeping them aloft in a way that violated every instinct but obeyed every law of physics. In the cabin, passengers had gone from screaming to stunned silence. The plane still felt wrong, tilted, vibrating oddly, but they'd stopped falling. They weren't going to hit the ocean. Not yet. The teenager in 13D wiped her tears. Are we going to be okay? The businessman next to where Elena had been sitting stared at her empty seat with new understanding. That woman, he whispered. She's flying the plane. She's actually saving us. Elena coordinated with air traffic control. Shannon approach, this is United 920. We're established at 12,000 feet with significant structural damage and asymmetric flight profile. We need priority landing, longest runway, full emergency response. United 920, Shannon approach. We copy. Runway 24, 10,495 feet. All emergency services standing by. Winds currently 280 at 15 knots. You're cleared for immediate approach. Copy, Shannon. Be advised, our approach profile will be non-standard. We'll be maintaining right bank throughout final approach. Landing will be hard. A pause. 920, we understand. The runway is yours. We're ready for you. Elena turned to Hayes. Captain, here's how this is going to work. We can't straighten out without losing control. So we're going to land in a bank. That's impossible. No, it's improbable. Big difference. Elena's voice carried absolute certainty. We'll maintain 12-degree bank through final. At 50 feet, I'll talk you through a rapid bank reduction and flare. It'll be rough, but the gear will take it. This is a 787, it's built strong. Hayes swallowed hard. You've done this before. Twice. Both times in smaller aircraft. But the physics scales up. She paused. Do you trust me? He looked at her, this woman who'd appeared from nowhere, who'd been dead for 2 years, who'd somehow turned certain disaster into possible survival. Yeah, he said. I trust you. The approach to Shannon took 25 minutes. Every mile felt like an eternity. Elena called out constant adjustments. Add 2% power, ease right rudder, there, hold that attitude. The F-22s escorted them down, Blade and Reaper flanking the damaged airliner like protective angels. "Looking good, Valkyrie," Blade transmitted. "You're doing the impossible here." "Not impossible," Elena replied calmly. "Just very, very difficult. There's a difference." At 1,000 feet, Elena's voice became sharper, more focused. "Gear down." The landing gear extended with a reassuring thump and 3 green lights. 500 feet. Maintain current profile. Don't change anything. The runway appeared ahead, fire trucks and ambulances lining both sides, flashing lights creating a corridor of emergency vehicles. 200 feet. Looking good. Hold steady. Hayes' voice was tight, landing in a bank feels wrong. Every instinct says to level out. Ignore your instincts. Trust the math. 100 feet. In the cabin, flight attendants shouted final instructions, heads down. Stay down. Brace. 50 feet, Elena called. Now, Captain, reduce bank angle. Gently. 5 degrees, 3 degrees, level the wings. Hayes moved the controls with precision born from 3 decades of flying. The aircraft rolled level just as they reached the runway. Flare. Now. The 787 touched down hard. Very hard. The landing gear compressed fully, absorbing impact that made the entire aircraft shudder. They bounced once, a terrifying moment where everyone thought they'd lose it, then slammed back down. Hayes stood on the brakes. The aircraft slewed right, the damaged wing creating drag that tried to spin them. But Hayes compensated, fighting the controls with everything he had. They veered off the runway into grass, still traveling at 60 miles per hour. The nose gear collapsed. The aircraft pitched forward, sliding, metal screaming against earth. Then, finally, they stopped. Silence. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then the cabin erupted. Crying. Cheering. Prayers of thanksgiving in a dozen languages. Strangers hugging. The teenage girls sobbing with relief. The businessmen laughing and crying at the same time. They were alive. All 342 of them. Emergency crews surrounded the aircraft within seconds. Escape slides deployed. Passengers evacuated in organized chaos, many looking back at the damaged plane in disbelief that they'd survived. Elena sat in the cockpit, hands finally shaking now that it was over. The adrenaline that had sustained her was draining away, leaving her exhausted. Captain Hayes turned to her, eyes wet. "You saved us. You saved everyone." "We saved them," Elena corrected. "You trusted me when every instinct said not to. That took courage." Hayes shook his head in wonder. "Who are you really? How did you end up in seat 13F? Elena smiled tiredly. "Long story. Maybe over coffee sometime." Within minutes, the story began spreading. Emergency responders who'd witnessed the impossible landing started talking. Air traffic controllers shared the recordings. The F-22 pilots filed their reports. "Dead pilot saves 342 lives," became the headline heard around the world. News helicopters circled Shannon Airport. Reporters mobbed the terminal. Social media exploded with speculation, theories, eyewitness accounts. Inside the airport, Elena sat in a quiet room with airport security, NATO officials, and increasingly nervous public relations people who had no idea how to handle this situation. A U.S. Air Force colonel arrived within 3 hours, flying in from a nearby base. Colonel Michael Torres, he'd been Elena's commanding officer 6 years ago. He walked into the room, stopped, and stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. "Elena?" His voice cracked. "My God. We buried you. I gave the eulogy at your memorial. I'm sorry, sir. I survived the Arctic crash. Ended up in a Norwegian hospital. By the time I was coherent, you'd already declared me dead. And I chose not to correct it. Torres sat down heavily. You just walked away. From everything? I was dying on the ground even though I was alive in the air. The PTSD, the nightmares, I couldn't do it anymore. When fate gave me an out, I took it. I needed to stop being Valkyrie. And today? Elena looked at him steadily. Today, 342 people needed Valkyrie more than I needed peace. So I came back. Torres was quiet for a long moment. The brass is going to want you back. Full reinstatement, probably a promotion, definitely a medal. No. Elena's voice was firm. I'm not coming back to active duty. I can't. I won't survive it a second time. Then what will you do? Elena thought about the captain and co-pilot, about how they trusted her completely despite every instinct screaming otherwise. About the techniques she developed that had saved lives today. About all the pilots out there who might face similar situations. I'll teach, she said slowly. The Volkov protocol shouldn't be some legend that people half remember. It should be standard training. If I can teach others what I know, then when the impossible happens, more people will know how to handle it. Torres smiled. That might be the best idea you've ever had. The press conference was scheduled for the next morning. Elena had barely slept, but she looked composed as she walked to the podium, wearing clothes borrowed from an airport staff member since her luggage was still on the plane. Cameras flashed like lightning. Questions shouted from every direction. Elena waited for quiet, then began. My name is Captain Elena Volkov. 2 years ago, I was declared killed in action during a classified mission over the Arctic Ocean. The truth is, I survived but chose not to correct the record. I was suffering from severe PTSD and needed to step away from military flying. I built a quiet life in Oslo, working as a technical writer. She paused, looking at the sea of faces. Yesterday, I was just another passenger on Flight 920, flying to Frankfurt for a work meeting. When the aircraft was critically damaged, I had a choice. I could stay in my seat and let everyone die, or I could step forward and do what I'd trained my entire career to do. The choice was obvious. A reporter shouted, "Why fake your death?" I didn't fake it. I survived something that killed me on paper. And I chose not to correct the mistake because I desperately needed to stop being Valkyrie. The constant edge of disaster flying was destroying me mentally. When I got a chance to walk away, I took it. Will you return to active military service? No. I can't. My PTSD is real and ongoing. But I will train others. The techniques I used yesterday, the Volkov protocol, should be taught widely. Commercial pilots, military pilots, anyone who might face extreme emergency situations. The impossible is only impossible until someone teaches you how it's possible. What would you say to critics who might call yesterday's landing luck? Elena's expression hardened. Luck is the intersection of 6,000 hours of training with desperate need. Those 342 people are alive because I spent years studying situations exactly like yesterday's disaster. I've saved 4 aircraft now using these techniques, 3 military, 1 commercial. That's not luck. That's preparation meeting purpose. What about the people who thought you were dead? Your family. Elena's voice softened. That's the hardest part. My parents grieved for me. My friends moved on. I caused them pain by staying hidden. I'll have to live with that choice. But I made it for my survival, and I'd make it again. Why come back now? Because yesterday proved I was wrong to hide. The world still needs what Valkyrie knows. And hiding from who you are doesn't bring peace, it just delays the moment when you remember why you were meant for this work. The final question came from a young journalist: what happens next for you? Elena smiled. I'm going to build something. A training institute. The Valkyrie Institute. We'll teach extreme emergency procedures to pilots worldwide. Because the next time something impossible happens, I want there to be someone aboard who knows what to do. The impossible should never cost lives again. The Valkyrie Institute opened in a modern building near Oslo Airport. Elena had worked tirelessly to create it, funded by a combination of government grants, airline sponsorships, and private donations from grateful passengers. The main training floor featured advanced simulators that could recreate any emergency scenario. The walls displayed photos from yesterday's successful rescues, including the dramatic images of Flight 920's damaged wing. On the central wall, in large letters, "The impossible is just the untrained. Master the edge cases, and you'll never face truly impossible odds." The first class of students included pilots from 15 countries. Commercial airline captains. Military test pilots. Flight instructors. All of them eager to learn from the legend herself. Captain Hayes from Flight 920 had joined as an instructor. "She gave me back my crew, my passengers, my career," he told the new students at orientation. "But more importantly, she taught me that the impossible is negotiable if you understand the physics." On graduation day, Elena stood before the first class of certified Volkov protocol specialists. Among them was the teenage girl from seat 13D, her name was Sarah Chen, and she'd decided to become a pilot because of what she'd witnessed. 3 years ago, Elena told them, "I sat in a quiet office in Oslo thinking I'd never touch aircraft controls again. That Valkyrie was dead. Then 342 people needed the impossible, and I remembered something crucial: impossible is just a lack of imagination combined with insufficient training." She looked at each student. "You're leaving here today with knowledge that most pilots will never have. You know how to handle situations that others will call impossible. That's both a gift and a responsibility. Use it wisely. Use it to save lives." Later, Elena found herself in the simulator with a struggling student, a young pilot named Maria who was attempting a Volkov recovery and failing repeatedly. "I can't do this," Maria said, frustrated. "It's impossible." Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "Not yet. But impossibility is temporary. Training is permanent. Reset and try again." Maria nodded, took a deep breath, and reset the simulation. Elena watched with quiet satisfaction as the student began again, this time with more confidence. Through the window, she could see aircraft landing at Oslo Airport. Each one a small miracle of physics and human skill. Each one carrying people home to their families. She thought about her own journey, from legendary pilot to presumed dead to technical writer to the woman who'd saved 342 lives to teacher and mentor. It hadn't been a straight path. It had been messy and painful and full of hard choices. But standing here, watching new pilots learn to do the impossible, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real peace. Not the fragile peace of hiding, but the solid peace of purpose. Her phone buzzed. A message from Henrik, the teacher she'd been dating. They'd gotten serious after she'd saved Flight 920, and he'd been endlessly supportive as she'd built the institute. "Dinner tonight? Want to hear about your day?" Elena smiled and typed back, "Yes. I have stories." She looked around the institute one more time. Students practicing in simulators. Instructors reviewing procedures. The next generation of pilots learning to turn impossible into possible. Valkyrie hadn't died in the Arctic. She just needed time to understand that legends don't get to retire, they get to evolve. Sometimes you have to disappear to discover who you're meant to become. And sometimes the world calls you back precisely when you've learned how to answer that call with wisdom instead of just courage. Elena Volkov, Valkyrie, had finally found her place. Not in the cockpit where death waited around every corner. But here, where she could multiply herself through others, where her knowledge could save thousands instead of just the few she could reach personally. The impossible was still out there. But now there were more people trained to face it. And that made all the difference. The Wall Street Journal ran a feature story on the Valkyrie Institute's third anniversary. The statistics were impressive: 847 pilots certified. 23 successful emergency recoveries using Volkov protocol techniques. An estimated 1,800 lives saved. But the story Elena treasured most never made the papers. A pilot named James Morrison, Hawk, the friend she'd saved years ago during her Air Force days, showed up at the Institute unannounced one morning. "Heard you'd returned from the dead," he said with a grin. "Thought I'd see it for myself." They had coffee in her office, catching up on years lost. "You know what the hardest part was?" Elena asked. "Realizing that I wasn't running away when I disappeared. I was saving my own life. And that was okay." Hawk nodded. "You taught me that everyone deserves to be saved. Even the savior." "Especially the savior," Elena corrected. On the wall behind her desk was a photo from Flight 920's landing, the damaged aircraft surrounded by emergency vehicles, passengers evacuating down slides. And in the corner of that photo, barely visible, was Elena in the cockpit window, exhausted but determined. Below it, a quote she'd written herself: "Some people are born for impossible moments. The trick is surviving them long enough to teach others what you've learned." Sarah Chen, the teenager from Seat 13D, was now in her second year of flight training and working part-time at the Institute. She'd told Elena once, "You didn't just save my life that day. You showed me what life could be about." As the sun set over Oslo, Elena closed up the Institute for the day. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, new opportunities to turn impossible into possible. She walked to her car, past the sign at the entrance, Valkyrie Institute, where legends are made, not born. Her phone rang. Captain Hayes from Flight 920. "Elena. Just wanted you to know, one of our 737s had a partial wing failure today. The first officer was one of your students. She used your techniques. Saved everyone. Textbook Volkov protocol." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "That's what this is all about. You're multiplying yourself," Hayes said. "That's the real miracle." After hanging up, Elena sat in her car for a moment, watching the lights of the Institute. She'd thought Valkyrie died in the Arctic. She'd been wrong. Valkyrie had just learned that true heroism isn't about being the one who always saves the day. It's about making sure there's always someone who can. And in that quiet moment, Elena Volkov, who'd been declared dead, who'd hidden from her legend, who'd returned when needed most, finally understood that her greatest rescue hadn't been Flight 920. It had been herself. The world still needed heroes. But heroes needed to survive to fight another day. And sometimes the bravest thing a hero can do is teach others to be heroes too. Elena started her car and drove home, where Henrik waited with dinner and a normal evening in a normal life that she'd earned through extraordinary means. She was Valkyrie. She was Elena. She was both and neither and everything in between. And for the first time in her life, that was enough.